Hey, I appreciate everybody. Thanks for having me come out again. I appreciate it. I enjoyed speaking of Palmito Ranch. I was down in my hometown. So, but this is when I'm talking about Fort Fisher, like John mentioned. This I usually give there's two. I give the Battle of New Bern and then Fort Fisher. And I usually give them either back to back or very soon. It's kind of like a package deal. But the good news is that they're both separate, so I can give either one of them kind of out of order. So. Typically, the presentation is Fort Fisher. It's also called the Gibraltar of the South. You may have heard that term. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's also one of the death knells of the Confederacy. You can say Vicksburg was death knell of the Confederacy. Gettysburg is the death knell of the Confederacy. So I'll leave that with you guys to what it is. But that's how it's typically known. The reason why I typically give this, as John was saying, I was a Marine for 20 years. And to talk about, especially when I used to give this to younger Marines in a different format, to talk about the differences between amphibious invasion in 1865 or 1862 for New Bern to modern day amphibious warfare and the differences and some of the similarities. So if you see me I'm going to try and reduce some of the Marine speak out of here because you guys probably don't care. And we're going to kind of focus on the big picture of it all, okay? All right, so next slide. Yep, so that was me back 20 pounds less, I guess. and that was me. Can anyone name where I'm at right here? Does this look familiar? Got some Civil War buffs. I'm in front of a big hole in the ground in Virginia. Petersburg, yeah, the crater at Petersburg. If y'all ever get a chance to go to Petersburg, just outside Richmond, highly recommend it. But the crater is still there, and they talk about it, and you can go see it to this day, which is very interesting. If you guys have seen the opening scene in Cold Mountain, where they blow it up, that's exactly what it is, okay? This is me. I have a history degree from the Naval Academy and a couple other master's degrees and everything, but no big deal. But I usually emphasize this to talk about the kids, I say kids, you junior Marines, as to what we talk about. But to my eyes, when you get old, they all look like kids. Next one. Okay. So in case you all have to get a phone call and you have to run out, this is what we're going to go talk about here. Fort Fisher was a primary defense for the port of the city of Wilmington, North Carolina. Fantastic engineering, that's why we nicknamed the Gibraltar of the South, and it's actually revolutionary for the time that it was, and it was very effective. We're going to talk about some of the coordination, the pros and the cons, and the things they did. And it's actually two battles of Fort Fisher. If you look in that opening slide, I had two different dates. The battle did not span 3 weeks. It was actually two separate battles of about 2 days each, most. Okay. If you guys ever do get a chance to go to Wilmington, North Carolina, I recommend it. It's pretty. You saw that one house that was there. That was a doctor's house. You can go tour and everything, and you can get married there and everything. Okay, next one. Okay, so why Wilmington? Who cares, right? You hear Chickamauga, you hear Gettysburg, you hear Vicksburg, you don't hear Wilmington. Who cares, right? And we're going to talk about it. Wilmington, geographically speaking, it was a critical stop for the Confederacy. If you look at it, if you came south out of Wilmington and you went down, you went straight to Nassau in the Bahamas. You get out east, and then you can head to Bermuda, where it is up here. Get around all the Nag's Head and the shoals and the dangerous area, and boom, you can get a shot straight to England for trade. So Wilmington was pretty cool. If you ever go to, we're talking about New Bern, North Carolina, that's in here. You have to do some pretty good navigation to get in up to the Neuse River up here, and then you can push boats and barges up if you wanted to get to Raleigh or any of the other major cities in North Carolina. Wilmington's a lot easier to get to. It's about 19 miles from the city of Wilmington down the Cape Fear River, which is it's just like the James River. It's semi-narrow, but wide enough where you can get two ships going back and forth, and it's a deep river, so you can get some ocean-going vessels straight up in there. So you can take a ship all the way around and then go into Wilmington. Hey, that's really great when you're trying to offload supplies and stuff like that. You don't have to anchor, and you don't have to have lighters going back and forth, right? And also when we get to you'll see some of the ideas. In addition to being 19 miles out, it's also 6 miles from the city of Wilmington to the nearest coast. So if you take any ships out here and you want to bombard the city of Wilmington, you can't do it. It's outside the range. So very well protected naturally, and it's got a really good river system that goes through it. Okay, let's see, next slide. 13th largest city in the Confederacy. It's about the same size as Atlanta. We hear about Sherman's march to Atlanta, and we see Atlanta now, and it's a huge city. Like, of course, Sherman wants to take this city. It's a huge railroad junction, right? Who cares? Really? Okay, so 9552. Can anyone tell me what the census of 2020 was for the city of Tuscumbia? Tuscumbia proper. Not Muscle Shoals, not Flores, none of that.
2020?
Yeah, 2020, roughly.
7,000?
It's about 9,052, so about 500 more people. So when you think of Tuscumbia, that was the size of Wilmington. That was the 99th largest city and about the same size as Atlanta was in 1861. Or 1860 for the 1860 census. Not counting the enslaved people, just the white folks there. But yeah, so it's okay. New Orleans, much larger city. Mobile, much larger city. Norfolk at the time, much larger city. So Wilmington was up there, but it wasn't. Okay. What makes it important, though, is these major ports are all gone. So when you have the Confederacy pulling trade in from Europe and other parts, where are they going to go? They can't go to any of these places. Why was Wilmington able to continue getting, blockade runners in all the way until 1865? That was pretty neat. Everyone else did. And why didn't the Union take it? The Union didn't take it because it was so hard because of the defenses at Fort Fisher. Next one. Okay, so we talked a little bit about blockade running here. 1861, when the Union started the blockade, it was 9-1. Out of every 10 ships that made, 9 made it through the blockade. Pretty good. Stuff was flowing through. Man, these Yankee sailors, they don't know what they're doing. This is easy, right? They got better. They got more ships. They understanding how things worked. Guess what? By 1864, that ratio was only 1 out of 10 made it through. So instead of 9, now it's a complete opposite. 1 out of 10 made it through. Wilmington had a very good rate of getting through because they were defended by Fort Fisher, which is over here on the end of this peninsula. The guns that they commanded, you look at Fort Fisher itself, why is it Gibraltar? Who cares? And this is an ugly fort. You have an L. What the heck? Have any of y'all been to Fort Monroe, Fort Gaines, any of those other coastal installation forts? Beautiful. Star fortresses, brick, people can move around, nice moats, everything was beautiful design. Look at this thing. This looks like my 11-year-old drew it when he woke up from a dream or something and figured out this is going to work, right? This is actually the best designed fort the Confederacy had. It was also the largest fort in the Western Hemisphere, square-wise. So you look at 1,900 yards by about 500 yards coming this way. So 19 football fields and 5 football fields going this way. You think about that scale, that's pretty big, right? 44 guns, roughly. You had 2 different levels. You had about 22 on one, 23 on a higher zone, so you could do a close-in fight. Higher elevation if you wanted to range it out a little further. All scattered across through here, right? Here you had landmines kind of put up, with wires. It was torpedoes, I guess they call them, you know what I mean? Not a lot of defenses had those things. These guns and these turrets they're normally going towards the land side, facing out, shooting this way in case of a land attack. They could pivot 180 degrees, and they could cover all this area back here. So you had 360 degrees of coverage by an L-shaped defense, which was kind of interesting, right? These guys aiming out, but guess what? All the way through here, if there was a Union ship, they could cover the entire area, right? And you see that it's neck down from the narrow portion of the peninsula. You can't get around it too easy. You can't just go up and around. It's very hard because you have the Cape Fear River there. And the Cape Fear River at the time was flowing pretty good. You would have to have you couldn't do a whole bunch of engineering with little small barges because they would they would push down the river. So very well defended. In fact, it was so well defended they couldn't take it all the way until 1864. And Grant knew this. Grant was just like, Fort Fisher is the thorn in my side. They took Vicksburg, man, before they took this one. Right? What does that tell you? Very interesting thing. But probably the most critical thing about Fort Fisher had that made it such an awesome defensive fort is it was made in sand. When Lieutenant Robert E. Lee was up at Fort Monroe as an engineer, he made a beautiful fort. And had bricks, and it was gorgeous, and it could maintain across hurricanes, and it didn't matter. This thing looks like my backyard projects. They're terrible, right? The sand. But I'll tell you what, you guys ever shoot guns, right? You shoot into a brick, what happens, right? The brick fragments, it breaks away, and then the bullet, okay, now you just made, you ever gone to Fort Pulaski over near Fort Sumter with holes in it? They just batter holes into it until the fort crumbled, right? When you ever shoot into sand, right? Loose sand, what happens, right? Nothing. The bullet just gets lodged in and loses all its energy, and ta-da, you can maintain this thing. The colonel in charge of it, towards the end of the latter half of the war, Colonel Lamb, 29-year-old gentleman, was a lawyer. He wasn't an engineer, but he was smart. And he learned from, so the Crimean War happened in 1851, right over there near Ukraine, right? That's going on right now. And the Malakoff Tower in Sevastopol stood out against British for over a year. They could not take that. And if you ever look at it, I'll get into another picture, how Malakoff Tower looks kind of like this. And that's what he ended up doing, right? People also call this you think of the pyramids. The pyramids required years and years of tons of slave labor and mule and beasts of burden to build it. So this thing too, they only had 2 diesel engines to help move stuff. The rest of it was all done by manpower. Slave, soldier, horse, donkey, prepping this thing up. Fort Monroe could take a hurricane, right? No big deal, because it's got brick to hold it in. You have any kind of weather storm goes in through this, you're constantly always having to build this thing. Very manpower heavy, right? But that's not the only one. So you have this, right? Okay, so what else? You had a couple other batteries over here.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, you had a couple batteries over here. You see one over here, you see one over here. So even if you're able to get a ship that comes up through here, and you're getting bombarded the entire time, right? To get in. You want to get all the way to Wilmington, you're going to have a long day to get up there. Because you're going to get peppered by everything. And I'm not talking infantry with rifles. We're talking cannons that they had placed in batteries, right? And that was their sole job, right? Further, you wanted to get through here, you have to get pretty close due to these narrow shoals. So if you're a blockade runner, you hugged Fort Fisher, and these guns provide protection from you. If a Yankee blockade runner was chasing you, they would turn around because they did not want to get stuck in these narrow channels because they're going to run aground or they're going to get shot. And if you look at some of these massive cannons that were coming up here, they were sitting ducks. And you couldn't take this turn at high speed to get up through the river because you would never make it. So Wilmington, critical to the blockade that we're going through there. Let me give you some quick numbers here, right? 1863, 1864, 2,600 medicinal crates, 4,300 tons of meat, 500,000 pairs of shoes, 300,000 blankets, 330,000 rifles, 960 tons of saltpeter, 750 tons of lead. That's what came through the port of Wilmington with the defense that we had at Fort Fisher. As General Lee told Colonel Lamb, if Wilmington falls, I cannot maintain my army. It'll be hard, I can't. It was the sole thing. So Fort Fisher was keeping the Confederate army alive, especially the Army of Northern Virginia at that time, was keeping them alive. So critical place for Fort. Okay, let's see here. Next one. I'll get into this in the next slide as we go. Also, while the slide's advancing, just so you notice on the wires, so you don't have to go backwards, that's good. They had communication from different sides. They had telegraph type, and Colonel Lamb actually had telegraph capability to Wilmington. Oh no, you can go forward, sir. Okay. Over to Wilmington where the generals were at. But that's it. This is a quick example of the, I couldn't get it on one slide, so I'm sorry. But here's the Malakoff Tower in the Crimean Peninsula, and the city of Sevastopol. But if you can't see it here, but this ends right here, and there's water up here. So the Malakoff Tower could shoot into the water, and it could shoot around, but look, it's a basic L design, and it stood the defense, right? It's a very interesting place. 500 slaves, roughly, come and go. Take a little bit as they go. Major General Whiting, has anybody heard of him? Just show of hands, as out of curiosity. Yeah. He's not a Braxton Bragg, he's not a Leonidas Polk. He's a very small guy, right? But Whiting was actually in charge of the garrison at first, but he had a reputation for being a drunk. Yeah. So I guess he lost a lot of credibility with Jefferson Davis in Richmond. Plus, he always was kind of a guy who was like Chicken Little. The Union's going to attack us next. They know we're important. I need more men. I need more men. And it was valid. I mean, think about it. Maybe he wasn't a perfect, strategist, but he knew it was inevitable. But he cried too early for trying to get men. And Jefferson Davis, I don't have any more men. You know what I mean? You got what you got. In fact, when Whiting was there, they were actually taking forces towards the end of 1864. They were taking some of the North Carolinians out of there to supplement Hardee's army going against Sherman in the South. And he got down to a point where he had problems with it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so these are some actually, I'm glad somebody took a picture. If you were in the ocean and you were looking at that long side of the L, that face side, this is what you would see. The beach, a wooden fence palisade, which is very good against infantry just doing a regular basic attack, and you have to negotiate that wall, and while you're negotiating it, you're getting peppered, right, by these forces. The land side looked like this. They've done a really good job of recreating, and when I get towards the end of the presentation, I'll show you. But this is from inside the fort, looking at these bits. Now this is good, talking about the engineering, right? Here is the gun traverses up here. And you can stack them, you can turn them around 360 degrees, but then here are the cover hills that were, cover that was here, so you had over the interlocking field of fire, but you had a narrow field of view, which when you're going to attack, you have a narrow window to be attacked in. Really good, right? The gun crews, if you were under attack, you would come into here. These magazines also served as shelters for the gun crews. Again, it's just sand. They did try and get grass to grow on there, just basic beach and marsh grasses to kind of hold it, try and keep some of the sand in place, but you're going to fight the elements for that. And then from the ocean, this is what you would have seen too, up high. This is the lower section, and they had one up on some other guns that were up a little higher, we can get some range. But very defensive. Next slide. Very good way to look at it. Like I said, about 44 guns. All right. 44 guns by the end of the end of the war, and where we're at now in December 1864. Okay, you guys know who this guy is, right? Good old Spoons Butler, right? Spoons Butler is a bumbling idiot, right? Right here, I even made it its own bullet point, right? Militarily, the guy was terrible. Diplomatically, the people of New Orleans, he was terrible, right? You know what I mean? But for some reason, this guy had political pull. Did y'all know that they actually wanted him to run as Lincoln's vice president in the 1864 election? And then when he was like, nah, they said, hey, we want you to run against Lincoln because we think you can beat him. Some people were doing that. So the guy had this tremendous political clout, right? However, militarily, he was bad. And Grant knew this. But what's Grant going to do, right? Grant had a problem because he couldn't fire him, and Butler was in charge of the armies for around North Carolina, but he couldn't fire him because all that backlash would have come back on Grant, and he just didn't want that, right? So he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to put you're obviously in charge of the geographic area, but I'm going to put this guy, General Godfrey Weitzel here, in charge of the attack to take it. So now you have, Major General with a Major General, one working underneath him, even though he's in command, he's in charge of the attack. Nothing we do nowadays in the military would ever stand that hierarchy. That is so discombobulated. Basically, Grant's telling him to shut up, and this guy's going to actually do the attack, right? You guys have seen the movie Glory, right? When they attacked Battery Wagner. Yeah. Weitzel was the guy in charge of attacking Battery Wagner in South Carolina. Just by chance. Weitzel was also 29 years old, the same age as Colonel Lamb. So it worked out pretty neat, right? But oh well. And the Navy side of the house and the attack on Fort Fisher is David Dixon Porter, right? We all know the guy who took Mobile, right? As David Glasgow Farragut. David Dixon Porter was actually his foster brother. So they grew up, and they're both very able commanders. Farragut couldn't do it because he was ill at the time, but Porter's really good. Okay, next slide. Okay.
That's a big bomb.
That's a big bomb. So this is Butler's big idea. Of course, now obviously this is the Bikini Atoll. That's nuclear, right? But you remember how I was standing outside the crater at Petersburg, right? Yeah. Butler came up with this idea and said, "Hey, let's try this," right? He was also up at Petersburg when he saw the crater, and he's like, we can do this here. And he came up with this idea. I'm going to take a ship, I'm going to make it look like a blockade runner. I'm going to pack this thing with only 215 pounds of explosives, not nearly enough. And I'm going to put this thing over near Fort Fisher. We're going to take it as close as we can to it. We're going to blow it up, and then all the Confederates will be lost and dazed, and oh my gosh. And at the same time, we'll hit them with some infantry forces, and the fort will fall. And we're going to take care of it in one big cool swoop. And guess what? I'm going to look good because it was my ingenious idea and the military stuff, and it's going to be really great. I mean, and you know, Porter was like, are you serious? You know, and he couldn't believe it, but he's like, hey, let's try it. Why not, right? It's the end of the war. We know how it's going to end. Let's do it. And Grant's like, okay, let's see how this works. Seriously, that was their response. None of them were enthusiastic about it, but they were kind of like interested. Can you pull this off? Right? Oh, well, we'll see. Okay.
Did DuPont have something to do with that too?
With this, I think...
there was a naval guy that kind of got Butler's ear, from what I remember. I mean, it ended up being Butler's idea, like you said.
He took credit for it.
Yeah.
But so here's the problem, though. These guys came up with this idea, but they really didn't think it through. Again, naval ordnance in its infancy, right? Hey, we got a ship, we can pack explosives. We did that at Petersburg. We know we can do this, right? Now, how are we going to link fuses to it and time it so it's a uniform distribution across the powder so it has a full and complete explosion instead of a, one stage at a time, or there's a delay, or some of the powder doesn't go, you know what I mean? How are we going to do that? And by the way, we're on a ship, right? So we got to drive this thing. We're going to leave the guys on board when this thing blows up. We're going to anchor it and get them off. And how are we going to do that? We'll figure it out. That is kind of like the way they were thinking. And it was bizarre, but I think everybody wanted to try it. Side note, General Godfrey Weitzel, who's here. You guys ever been to any of these revolutionary or Civil War sites where they talk about the #1 killer of women were the hearths, when they had the kitchen fires and they had long dresses and they burned to death, right? And you think, come on, really? And realistically, it really didn't happen a lot. It didn't happen nearly as much as they said. But an interesting point, General Godfrey Weitzel, his wife actually died from that on cooking Thanksgiving dinner in Cincinnati. She actually died from that. So, you have one person die from it, and then it spreads across like, all women in the 1860s were dying from it. You know what I mean? But very kind of sad. They just got married like 2 weeks before, and then she died. But something else to think about. Okay. Let's see. Next slide. Okay. Before we get here, now this is kind of neat. We talk about Army and Navy, right? It's not just a good football game.
It's getting better now.
Yeah, it's getting a lot better now, right? But in 1860, it was terrible. The Army had their thing, the Navy had their thing. They didn't even want to talk to each other. They didn't want to play together. They didn't want to coordinate any kind of landing. They didn't want to do anything, right? So, okay, Porter's like, hey, guess what, Butler? You and Weitzel, you go do your thing. You tell me when to show up. I'll show up with guns and I'll blast the target. Okay? And leave me alone. Let me go do my Navy thing, right? And then they were like, okay. So Butler kind of took that to heart. He's like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. We'll do this. Hey, get that bomb ready to go, and we'll put it on a ship, and we'll go ahead and do this, right? Yeah. And then, hey, guess what? There's Confederate spies in Norfolk where we're at. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this fleet, and we're going to sail it north, and we're going to send some boats up the Potomac for a little bit to kind of freak out the spies so they're not going to know what they're doing. He didn't tell Porter any of this. So Porter was like, why are all Butler's ships going north for a little bit? And then Porter was like, I don't know, I don't care. I'm going to Fort Fisher, that's what we agreed upon, and we'll figure it out, right? Seriously, they did not communicate. So Butler sent some ships up. He sent that one ship dressed up like a blockade runner to go ahead and do that big bomb. And he said, we're going to do this, right? So right before Christmas Eve, around 3 in the morning, Butler's bomb ship, right, comes up. And they park it. All right, light the fuses, let's get out of here. And they jumped on a little boat and they steamed away and the thing blew up. And it was funny because there was actually a couple African-American gentlemen, I don't know if they were slaves or freedmen, but they were actually fishing at 3 in the morning off the coast and they saw it blow up and they're like, looks like them there Yankee ships blew a boiler. That was their exact quote. That's all it looked like, a ship below a boiler, right? It was, they moved it in the dark of night. They thought it was 300 yards from the beach. It was actually over 600 yards from the beach, and it wasn't anything. I think they could hear the Confederates laughing from inside the fort going, what was that, right? Regardless, that huge, massive shock and awe was followed by nothing. Nothing. Until Porter decided to show up Christmas morning around 8 in the morning with a large flotilla of forces. So, again, he showed up. You see some sail ships, right? You see some wooden ships. You see they're all back and they're all rotating in. So what they did, he parked about 1.5 miles off the coast, and they started shooting around 8 in the morning. Okay, so set the stage, right? The Confederates at Fort Fisher there, they had total ammunition, right, that they had. So you take these 2 massive frigates that were here, you take all of their ammo together, these 2 ships, that's all they had at Fort Fisher. Whoa, not a lot, right? Of course, Lamb's like, I need more. Sorry, I got to feed cannon going across the Arm of Northern Virginia. You get what you can, right? So they come up, 590 guns on 63 ships, 1.5 miles out against Lamb's, 45 guns over there. Completely outmatched. It was really rough. Throughout the course of the day, I'm a little spoiler alert here. The Confederates fired 672 shells right across the entire day. Union fired from the ships over 10,000 shells going in, right? So if you look about it. What they actually ended, what Lamb said, he told every gun shoots 1 round every 30 minutes to help save your ammo. And to let them know that we're still kicking, right? So this is kind of cool. You take some of these pictures, right? You see these dot, 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 dot. Anyone have any idea what this is?
They're cannon shots.
They are cannon shots. What kind of cannon shots? Do you know?
Well, they're probably, if that's from the ship, they're bigger than probably a 24-pounder.
So these are coming from the beach, and they're coming out to the ship.
Solid ship.
So, yeah, they're skipping them. Exactly. Yeah, so pretty cool. So if you got the, you have the higher guns, you have the lower guns. The lower guns can, it's like skipping a stone on a river, right? You just toot, 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 right? That's what they were doing. Not the rounded, coned, like mini ball looking cannon, but the round, archaic ones. You could skip them. And that's what they were doing. So, but the good news is if you can skip it, it's going to be right near the water surface, right? So if you puncture a hole in a ship near the water's edge, you can sink it, right? So it's actually, it's not missed, it's actually by design trying to get out that far.
Down at the water line.
Yep, hit the water line and increase flooding.
That's pretty smart, kind of like a torpedo.
Yeah, you're just skipping it across the river, right?
Nail busters.
The only problem was that they're 1.5 miles out.
Yeah.
So it's a little harder to keep it accurate, and you're also totally dependent on the sea state. If the sea state's choppy or anything like that, there goes your skip. You know what I mean? But thankfully, at this point on this day, on Christmas Eve, it was actually pretty calm waters. It was overcast and kind of cruddy weather, but the rest of the weather was coming in behind it. Okay. All right, see you next slide.
Then you look at it over 7,000 feet, 280 is a mile.
Yeah. Yeah, so it looked pretty bad. So Porter showed up and just started blasting the fort. He's like, okay, and he waited, and finally he was like, Butler's not going to show up. Butler didn't show up, right? And he was like, what are you going to do? Very, very rough. Okay, so this is it. I have the old Army Navy just because I'm a Naval Academy grad, and there were completely bad guys, but nothing was coordinated between the two. Next slide. That's the big thing we do. You guys look at D-Day and all, and Iwo Jima, Saipan, all those totally, and there's a greed. You know what I mean? You shoot artillery, and once the Marines get ashore, that's a line, and the command shifts from the Navy to the Marines and things like that. But it was very rough.
My favorite man.
Say again?
My favorite man.
Yeah, we love Cousin Eddie, right? I'll let you figure out who that's going to be. But Christmas morning, finally, after Porter shoots, he goes back up towards Morehead City, and he has Butler, where were you, man? I just blasted the heck out of this fort all day, and you didn't even show up. And they're getting mad, they're blaming each other, and they're like, okay, let's go do it again, let's go do it again, let's go down there again. And they're like, okay, you're going to do it this time? And they do. So finally, they hate each other now at this point. They go down there and they start shooting again, right? And they shoot and they shoot. And Porter unleashes another barrage on Fort Fisher. But oddly enough, when it comes time to land the forces, Butler, Weitzel, whoever was in charge, theoretically it was Weitzel, I guess, gets overruled by Butler, and they say, just land 500 men and we can take this fort. So they land 500 men, right? And then Porter goes, hey, you gonna land any more? They're like, nah, I don't know, we'll see what happens. So they land 500. Porter's like, hey, well, the Navy's going to get on some of this action too. So the Navy sends these guys from these ships ashore too, and they still have like no idea what they're doing, right? So they get ashore, and really they say, okay, well, let's try to attack this fort. And they find out that all the guns that they've been blasting now for 2 days are all still active. The Confederates only lost 2 guns for the entire barrage, and everything was still working. So they go up to attack it. And they're like, oh gosh, the landside guns are all still working. This is not going to end up well. And Weitzel, who was at Battery Wagner, is like, we're not going to do this. We're going to die, all of us. So Weitzel goes, nah. And Butler's like, okay, come on back then. And it's funny because through all this, General Grant, who didn't trust Butler, didn't trust Weitzel a little bit, had sent an observer. Also, I think a major, I believe. And the major was right next to Weitzel. And their recon goes, hey, sir, around the right side over near the Cape Fear River, it's kind of weak. This fort is not a triangle. You know, remember, they didn't have aerial imagery or nothing. They had no idea. This fort only has 2 sides. And Weitzel's like, nah, they would never build one like that. Forget it. And then Butler's like, okay, everybody get on the ships and leave, right? So Weitzel leaves. Butler takes off and leaves a chunk of his men on the beach because weather was rolling in, so his transport commanders were like, hey, we want to get out of here. He left those guys on the beach and took off. Porter's like, why is Butler leaving? And why did he leave all of his men on the beach? So Porter actually sends gunboats to help try and get these guys off the beach. They actually do that on the 26th and the 27th to get all the men off, right? Shame on the Confederates for not launching outside the walls and attacking it and taking those men as prisoner. They did not do that, so shame on them. But I think they were, I just what they were thinking. And maybe it was Christmas and they wanted to open presents, right? I guess. But regardless, at the end of that, Porter gets back to Morehead City and he wires Grant. And he's like, oh my gosh, sir, you're not going to believe this. And he tells him, and Grant is furious. Grant fires these guys. He told Butler, you're done, get out of here, which was a very gutsy move, but that's how angry Grant was, right? So he replaced him with General Ward. And he was, Weitzel, what the heck, you didn't land your men? I told you earlier, if you land your men and you cannot take the fort, it becomes a siege, right? Just like Vicksburg, just like parts of Richmond, that's what we're doing. Because they know that once we start digging in, I can resupply you all day long because I'm the Union Army and I'm fat with supplies, right? Yeah. But he didn't do it. So that's why he got the boot. Okay, next slide. So he ends up replacing with this guy, Alfred Terry. Now, Alfred Terry was a lawyer. He was not a military man. He was a political general. The only difference between him and Butler was that he was actually intelligent enough on military matters, and he did not have a lot of pride. So he was a very successful military commander. This is David Porter as well. I didn't get a chance to put his picture in there. You guys know Jim Mattis, General Mattis, he used to be Secretary of Defense, was a Marine General, who I used to like before he became a super liberal. But he has a quote that's really good. And he says, commander relationships are important, but relationships between commanders is even more important. Yeah. I was like, that's a lot of good points, right? Yeah. So when he replaced Terry, when he kicked off Weitzel with Terry and Porter actually got along really well. And they actually said, we are not going to do what we just did over Christmas again. We're going to take Fort Fisher, but we're going to be smart about it and we're going to work together. Imagine that. It's like me. It's like, that I tell my kids, work together to clean the bathroom, work together to clean your room, right? And then finally the light comes on and they do it and they're done in an hour. That's exactly what happened here, right? Yeah. Only they clean the bathroom, obviously, right? Okay, next slide. So it's pretty neat. Grant actually said, what do you need? And Terry told him, I need about 10,000 men. And he goes, I'm going to give you 9,600 men. Okay, that's fine. Butler and Weitzel actually had a very substantial force. They had over 6,000 men initially to take it, but they only landed 500, right? Which is weird. But Terry knew what he was doing. So they regrouped, they replanned, they come back out now for the second battle of Fort Fisher. Now we're back, and now we're in January. So roll up from 1864 to 1865, and here we go. Porter decides to put his ships, instead of a mile and a half out, he pulled them about a mile in. Make their guns a little more effective with it. On the note too, remember Fort Fisher was only firing one round per every 30 minutes, right? Porter had the idea, and he had the thought in his mind that my guns are so effective that I silence those guns. That's what he thought. He had no idea on the ammo situation inside Fort Fisher. So he's like, okay, we'll blast them. And he relayed that to General Terry as well, saying, hey, in the second barrage, you're not going to have any guns left. It's going to be an easy roll for you. Regardless, he puts them in. You can see there's some wooden ships, there's some steel ships as the Union Navy is converting out from sail to steam. And then you had another row here. So if a ship, once he shot up, he needed to take a break, he would pull away and another one would come in and fill his position up there and they would shoot. So they had a continuous barrage of fire on January 13th. They had done the same thing early on Christmas and it worked good, so they're going to do it. Also at nightfall, the wooden ships pulled away and kind of sat back here while the steel ships were up there providing a little bit of cover in case there was any kind of cans up coming in. But worked pretty good. 8:30 in the morning, first line started firing, right? And what they ended up doing was doing a coordinated, imagine that, naval gunfire and amphibious landing at the same time. So these guys started shooting. The transport ships, which are not on the screen, but they're up here, actually landed their troops about 3 miles north of Fort Fisher, outside range of these guns and away from everything else. And they landed them way up there, which makes sense. Keep these guns busy while we land these troops. And the only thing that can stop them is infantry from somewhere else, which Colonel Lamb didn't have. There were some Confederate forces in Wilmington, and I'll get to you in a second. Okay?
My third great grandfather would have been in there just a little over a month from the time he enlisted or draft was drafted.
A month in the Army when he came in here? Yeah, zero that maybe, right?
Yeah, he was born 32, so he wasn't real young either.
One question
cool.
about the ships. You know, a lot of times they'll move them and make a little circle. In this case, they just anchored them.
They just anchored them.
Yeah.
Yep. Anchored them or kept them right there.
Stationary.
In position. Yeah. Very, very cool move that the Navy could do.
Now, the question I was going to ask you, if you know, where were these men getting on board these boats, the transport boats? Where were they getting on at?
So what I kind of gloss over is the Union had taken over Morehead City up in North Carolina.
Okay.
And they were using that as a base to come for these attacks. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a good question. They didn't just come out of the ether. You know what I mean? So
Morehead City.
yeah, Morehead City. So January 13th at 8 o'clock, they dumped 10,000 rounds into Fort Fisher again. Man, Fort Fisher's taking a beating. Now remember, Fort Fisher's original commission was to withstand the army of a fleet. No one else has ever had that's your mission, to withstand the firepower from a fleet. But they did it. They did it on December 24th and 25th, and then January 13th, Fort Fisher took it again.
That's a lot of rounds, 10,000.
It's a lot of rounds. That's right. Exactly right. And still, you got over 690 guns shooting it. Man, holy cow, right? Let's see. Next slide. So January 14th here, Lamb was actually reinforced. They had only had about 1,000 up to that point, but when they came back again with a vengeance, they knew that. And General Bragg, who was actually in charge of Wilmington, and General Hoke, one of the subordinates, they knew, okay, this is for real. You know, Whiting was yelling it, but this is really happening. So they reinforced about 500 men. They just landed them over here, brought them in. So they had about 1,500 men on January 3rd, the morning or evening of January 13th, morning of January 14th. But yeah, pretty good. So these guys end up landing up here, like I mentioned, right? And they end up coming down. And they get over here to just kind of outside the range of these guns. And they said, okay, we're stuck on a peninsula here, you know what I mean? So they ended up digging a trench, pretty much in sand. So it's pretty easy to dig, and you can dig it pretty fast. But this time, they actually came with shovels and entrenching equipment, whereas last time, they really didn't because Butler was an idiot, right? Yeah. But these guys, they got in, they dug, and they dug a trench. And it was a very kind of a nice wide trench in sand pretty quick. But they were able to orient forces this way and orient forces that way. So in case any forces did come down, they could turn around and shoot them. And, you know, kind of like the Spartans at 300, you're coming down to it, your numbers really don't mean anything because I got you in a funnel. This is exactly right. So no matter what Bragg and Hope did, they threw waves. These guys were sitting here in a defensive position, and they could ward it off, right? Yeah. And it's flat. Remember, it's the beach. There's not much there. There's maybe some small trees, some scrub and everything like that, but it's sand to stop
The
it.
Confederates had no naval assets at all at Wilmington.
The only thing they had, they actually they sank one on purpose, they thought, and they had a cruiser called the cruiser Chickamauga, but it didn't see any action. They didn't want to get it in here because you saw 690 ships from the Union against one cruiser.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking is they could have brought one to enfilade that infantry line.
Yeah.
But I mean, it would still probably be in the range of the guns outside on the other side of the ocean, right? They could shot over the peninsula.
They would have to get pretty close to do that, and it does get kind of shallow. I'm not sure if they would have been able to do that.
Okay.
But and one other thing too, leading to it. So why didn't Bragg and why didn't he send Hope to come down here and crush these guys out? Well, they didn't know what these guys were doing, and Bragg actually thought they were landing guys here so they could march to Wilmington and completely bypass Fort Fisher. So Bragg was very hesitant about throwing a lot of his men there because they wanted to attack them and delay all the way to Wilmington. So they kind of stopped there. Plus, Bragg was like, this is the Gibraltar of the South. They can't take that. It ain't going to happen. They're not going to take Fort Fisher. They got to be coming up this way. Turns out I was wrong. Right?
Did Porter lose any of his ships?
So again?
Did Porter lose any of his ships?
That's a good question. I don't recall. I'm sure he must have had some damage and retreated, but I don't recall any of them being sunk out there. That's a good point. That's a good question. Okay, so 14th, they did a little bit of prime, a little bit of recon to come down here the best they could and try to figure out what they want to do. Okay, next slide.
All right.
Yeah, so now we're getting closer to it, right? They had a safe landing foothold, a toehold on the beach, and then where they could safely land and administratively start putting people in. Okay, so now, rubber's going to start hitting the road. The morning of it, they started having some little bit of probing to see where they could get. All these cool landmines that we talked about, the defensive stuff, they're all been negated because all that naval gunfire and rounds impacting it has either destroyed the mines or severed the lines, the electrical lines that control it.
Wow.
So these guys were a little hesitant because they knew there were mines, but they were not sure of the damage on that, if they were even working. And nobody likes landmines, right? Regardless, so finally around 3 o'clock, they started, okay, we're going to get a little closer. Now here comes, this is the Navy, right? Why is the Navy sending sailors to go do the Army's job, right? This is kind of interesting. So remember all those ships that Porter had, right? He wanted the Navy to get a little bit of love. The Civil War is on the end. We need some action, boys. You know what I mean? We need to get our names in the history books of the Navy fighting on this thing. Yeah. So they landed a whole bunch of guys. Now they pulled a detachment of 10 from the ship, 15 from that ship, 20, 12, 13, 14, and put them all ashore. So all these guys got together and they're like, yo man, I clean guns, I don't do this. You know what I mean? What would you do? And who are you? And who are you? They didn't know each other. They had never worked with each other. It was crazy. It's like my son's Boy Scout troop going all messed up, right? Thankfully, they landed a few Marines with them. And the Marines are like, okay, I got it. This is a very bad situation, but this is what we're doing. And they kind of took charge, and they did. So Captain Dawson, a United States Marine, actually formed them up and created and got them a charge going. And when they got closer, the old, okay, sitting here is going to get us killed. We're going to go do something, right? And we're going to do it now. So as these guys were slowly prodding and probing and looking, these guys say, like, we're doing it, we're running, and here they come, right? And they form up, and Captain Dawson leads these guys here, right? And it's like, all right, here we go. Navy guys with guns, it's kind of dangerous. You're going to get shot in the back, right? You know, accidental discharge, right? From the Navy guys not used to shooting guns.
So let's go to the favorite part of the program for you, right?
Oh, yeah. It is. And there were reports of Marines peeling off to actually do sharpshooting to hit the guys and the guns, because that's what Marines were known for. Long range accuracy with rifles, right? But they did it anyways. Now, this is a blessing in disguise, right? Okay, next slide. Let's see what we got here. All right. This is a great painting. I love it. It's pretty cool. This is actually incorrect. The stars and bars would have been extinguished by this point too, and they were on the first state banner. They would, unless they had an old one they pulled out, right? So, but here comes the Navy. Woo! We're leading the charge and getting shot, right? Coming through here. But this was a distraction, because while these guys are coming over to hit the palisade and you go, enjoy the glorious action and getting killed, the Confederate troops saw that number and they had to shift people from defenders from one side to the other. So they actually, when they shifted all these guys over here to start shooting these guys first, it only left 250 Confederate soldiers and Confederate Marines, very few Confederate Marines, out there to defend the western flank. So this thing served as a very good distraction for the actual main assault. Totally not by design. Totally, they saw it happening, and the next guy I'm going to go into actually said, hey, you know what? They're occupied, they're distracted, let's attack. Okay, next one.
They have about 500 troops on the east side.
Yeah, so you can see, right, they're all distracted, so we're going to focus all of our forces over here to exploit that one gap and get in, right? Does anyone know who this guy is? This is cool. Okay, so if you forget everything I talk about and the numbers of bullets shot and everything and thousands of pounds of ordnance, this is then Colonel Uriah Pennypacker, right? He's actually still to this day the only general officer young enough that he could not have voted for the president who signed his commission as general. Right? Very interesting. So he grew up on the Valley Forge farm, where Washington had his winter headquarters in Valley Forge. That's where he grew up. Right, so he grew up right in Washington. I mean, history, right? Regardless, he grew up to the ranks, and then I think at Petersburg he got promoted to colonel at 20 years old. Imagine a 20-year-old that you may know as a general, as a colonel, right? And Pennypacker is a colonel, and they said even despite his age, he was a very good colonel, which is very cool to hear. You know what I mean? Regardless, he drove the forces and he got them going, and he said, "We're going to attack this thing," and he drove the force through it. Spoiler alert, General Terry said Pennypacker's action on that day was what motivated his men to cross through that berm, exploit that gap, and then take the fort. So he actually ended up getting the Medal of Honor for crossing in there and then planting the Union flag over there inside the fort. Pennypacker got seriously injured in the assault, and he actually, Terry said, "I'm going to make you a brevet brigadier general." At 20 years old, and they carted him away to a hospital. 2 months later, he got brevet promoted to a major general, right? At 20. So he was the youngest guy. Everyone always says, General Custer was the youngest general. Custer got it at 23, right? The Confederate general, what's his name? Robert, I forgot his name. I can't remember his name a little bit. He got it at 23. Pennypacker beat him. So, I love these distractions, right? So Pennypacker, after the war, went to the regular army. He came out as a colonel, right? Because they changed their forces. And then when he retired from the regular army, he ended up getting promoted on the retired list to brigadier general. So he retired as a brigadier general, and he actually died like 50 years after the Civil War due to injuries that he had received. So very unique character that highlights Fort Fisher. Okay, regardless. 3 o'clock, they finally break through and they start coming through here and they start routing. I mean, simply, it's numbers. 9,600 versus 1,600. You know what I mean? You're going to lose. It's just a matter of time. So from 3 o'clock, after they took these guns, they got in here. When the Union troops were real close and attacking on these parapets and walking through here, yeah, you're right. They could turn these guns, but what are you going to do? Shooting your own men? You know? Not that good. So what you end up doing is really abandoning the guns and then marching your men over there to attack them. And still, you're primarily a cannon guy, right? An artillery guy. You can shoot a musket, but it's not going to be well aimed. It's not going to be very good, but you could fight. Also at that time, around 6 o'clock, Colonel Lamb, who's over here controlling his men and fighting as a good leader should, where he can control them, he actually gets shot in the hip, and he gets evacuated out south to a hospital. Major Riley, his executive officer, comes over and takes command. Eventually, as you can imagine, the men start falling and they start losing ground and they start retreating back this way and they try to evacuate the best they can so they can have guns shoot into their position to actually try and repel the attack. It doesn't work, and finally around 10 o'clock in the evening, Fort Fisher falls. That's it, right? Very, very interesting, sad thing. When they initially thought, when David Dixon Porter saw Fort Fisher initially, with the sand and the way it was back, they said, man, it's going to take us a long time to do this. Well, finally, on the second wave here, the second battle of Fort Fisher, the thing fell in 6 hours. Pretty impressive. Next one.
What were the casualties on both sides? Roughly?
Yeah, I'm going to get there. That's perfect. I'll get that next slide. Okay, so here's just a zoom in. If you can see the forces came in and started, these guys just slowly fell back. Next slide. All right, so here's our conclusion, right, that we're looking at. Confederates had 500 killed or wounded and 1,400 taken prisoner. Our U.S. Army had 111 killed, 540 wounded, 13 missing, so that's about 700 if you do that math real fast. Yeah. The United States Navy and Marine Corps team that came over on the bastard had 81 killed, 220 wounded, roughly, and 29 missing, so that's about 400. So the U.S. had about 1,100 total casualties here. If you want to think about that. Fort Fisher 2, right? 19,682 projectiles. That's Navy, Bean County, going right there for you, right? That's the Navy does that really good. And 1.6 million pounds of ordnance fell into Fort Fisher during those 2 days, right? The largest land-sea battle in history until that time. They say that the landing of Guadalcanal was actually the largest amphibious landing after this, so you think about it. So you think of Guadalcanal and you think of a D-Day. D-Day happened June 6, 1944. Guadalcanal happened, I believe, a little bit earlier than that. So, but still, massive invasion on the scale. We all would love to say Longstreet's bombardment before Pickett's Charge was the largest artillery bombardment in the Western Hemisphere, and that's true until that time. This was more than that, right? More guns, more ships, more pounds of ordnance delivered, and it just totally impressive. 54 U.S. Medal of Honors on Fort Fisher Part 2 as well. So that's 54. Now remember, Medal of Honor back in those days were not as hard to get like it is now. Now it's very, very, very hard. This one, it was the Medal of Honor. There was no other secondary, tertiary kind of medals for valor, right? But 54. If you look at it here, Gettysburg had 64. That was 3 days of the badness that was Gettysburg. The entire Mexican-American War had 56. Petersburg, 9.5 month siege, had 52. Chickamauga, the bloodbath that it was, had 33. Chancellorsville, 26. Antietam, 20. And Fredericksburg, 19. This had 54. Now, I will say this. The Navy, up until this time, hadn't really fought. So how many Navy sailors got the Medal of Honor? This is where the Navy got their Medal of Honor count for World War II, really in this battle alone for the most part. So then you start wondering, that 54 count kind of watered down because the Navy was trying to throw it out like candy? Maybe. I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate, but still pretty impressive when you look at the valor, because even though you had a Medal of Honor, you still have to have valor dictated to get it. So that's still pretty good for if you think of just 2 days over there on Fort Fisher. Pretty intense fighting. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is Fort Fisher then and now. A hurricane had come through and bashed the New Inlet and actually was really good and actually created a real good shipping channel by pure chance. A hurricane before this, and it worked really good. The Army Corps of Engineers, if you look, it is right here. This would have been the inlet. Actually, where's the Fort Fisher? Yeah, right here would have been the inlet. So the Army Corps of Engineers corrected it. They fixed what the hurricane did, and they brought it all the way down. So this is now all one piece coming through there. Yeah. So when you go down there now, you really don't get too much of a good thing, but this is it. Okay.
So where's the, I'm sorry.
So I'm sorry, Fort Fisher way up here.
I got you. And where's the inlet now at?
The inlet would be right here.
That's the new inlet.
Well, it would be here, but this says new inlet. It would have been here, but like I said, the Army Corps of Engineers covered it in, and they built these two together.
I got you. But so how does the ship get to Wilmington?
So now you come through here and you go around.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But
that's an island down there.
Yeah.
I got you.
Smith Island.
Yeah.
But pretty interesting. One thing that's kind of neat, the Fort Fisher is the #1 visited Civil War site in North Carolina.
Wow.
Right? You would think the surrender at Chapel Hill with Johnson would have been, I thought would have been #1, you know, but it's not. This is. Now I will say this. Well, a lot of people are interested in Civil War history, but why is it the most visited one in North Carolina? Because they come to this aquarium right here, and you have to go right through it to get to the aquarium. I'm not going to lie to you. But the good news is they built up some of Fort Fisher, and when you see it, you're like, what is that? This is cool. And they come in and they stop. So it's a good pull to get people interested in the Civil War. Next slide.
Yeah.
This is Fort Fisher then. This is Fort Fisher now. All of these guns are all underwater now, and the structures have all rotted away. They're no longer there. The good news is that they have barricaded up this fort, the land here, to prevent it from eroding any further. But all this is gone. There's no more guns over here either. There's a couple markers, but that's about it. So here's the aquarium, all right? So parking lot right next to Mountain Battery, which is one of the major guns that stop blockade runners.
So that northeast end bastion up there, it's underwater too. I guess.
Yeah, there's nothing there. But you'll see, and I'll show you some pictures. I got some good pictures. You'll see there's a couple of parapets up here, and then it stops. Actually, I think it's right here, and then the road has access code right nearby. But you can see it. But yeah, all this is gone. And again, the Fort Fisher was used a little bit in World War II. It was decayed. Some of the soil, and there's like a nice rock that's on the North Carolina coast. They used to build roads and everything like that. All that was harvested and mined when all this eroded away, and was really unkept up. Okay, next slide. Yep. That's what you see now. This is where the fort would have been, so you can kind of see it.
Oh, yeah.
But you can see these parapets right here, and this is what people see when they drive by, and they're like, "What is that? That's cool." And off they figure. Next slide.
Now, before we go, right up the top there where it says North Carolina underwater.
Yep.
This is where the Union soldiers would have been.
They would have been, their trench line would have been way up here, and this is where they would have attacked, and they would have come around here to take the fort.
So would it have been, I'm assuming that's wooded?
It's beach scrub, small
Okay.
trees and everything like that.
Okay.
But it would have been it would look like the surface of the moon after the naval bombardment. So none of those trees would have been
That's
there.
what I was thinking, it wouldn't look like
They would have
that.
cut them down just for being able to range the fire.
Yeah, the Confederates would have come down too, so they could see an accurate fire.
David's ancestors was in the 13th Indiana, right? We was trying to zoom it in, but it couldn't focus right. He was on the left, the Union left, somewhere up in there. Names division.
Yeah, with Haynes, he was with,
That's where the minefield was too, right?
with the
Yeah,
Derby gang.
Minefield would have been right here.
Yeah.
It's where you park now to go see.
He was with the Derby gang. On that one slide, it had the 13th on it.
Oh, did it? Oh, we can go back when we're done. Take a look. Okay, next slide, please. And this is what they have now. They really, the land-facing parapets, they've rebuilt it back up, you know what I mean? And you can see it, you get a real good improvement. This would have been inside the fort, and this would have been, right here, actually, the Yankee flags, it would have been, this is where the North eventually took, the north-facing. But to give you an imaginary size of the scale of these parapets and how the gun deck would have been up here, pretty impressive. Next slide.
Yeah, they wrote it down some over 155 years ago.
They have, but the North Carolina Preservation Commission has done a good job of throwing sand back up and trying to keep it up to its original height.
Okay, good.
Is that
Yeah.
a national or state operated?
State.
It's a state park?
State, yes, sir. So, yeah, so here, this is if you were to have been attacking from the land face. All these folks are Union soldiers, probably your ancestors, right? Coming through here, they would hit this parapet. This would have what they would have probably have seen. So think about your clearance there. Next slide. They envision this. I don't know if this happened. I haven't been to North Carolina in over 5 years, but they anticipate putting this here right nearby, a $3.5 million building, which is really cool. But oh well, we'll see. I'll have to find an excuse to go back. Next slide.
Is that like, going to be like a museum?
Yeah. It's
Visitor center.
going to be an awesome visitor center, they say. I hope so. But if you guys do get a chance to go to Wilmington, North Carolina, it's very similar to Mobile, right? Got a battleship, just like Mobile, right? It's got beaches, just like Mobile. These beaches are a little nicer than Mobile Bay, but not nicer than Gulf Shores or any of the other Alabama beaches on the ocean, okay?
Yeah.
So, but they are pretty nice. And here you can see some tourists taking a look, and you can see the parapets up here. And you can so and my kids love it because they can run around and climb up on top of it and everything like that, and they can really sense history. A couple other good books. about it if you're interested in this sports or anything, and the aquariums are obviously awesome.
Yeah, I got both of them.
Oh, it is? Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
I guess you would.
Which one do you like the best of those two books?
I haven't read them.
You haven't?
I'm not gonna lie to you. I haven't read them. I've
There's
looked.
there's more on the Confederate Goliath about Battle of Fort Fisher than there is in the Wilmington campaign. And the Wilmington campaign uses a lot of the official records that's in it.
Oh.
And so I get more out of reading the other because I already have a copy of the official records on CD, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the Marine Corps had a whole pretty good book on U.S. Marines in North Carolina, the North Carolina campaign. That's where I got a lot of this information from too.
Okay.
So official Marine Corps propaganda, I guess. Next slide. That's all right. There's a whole bunch of sites, and you got 'em. And then obviously here's some Confederate gunners shooting a parrot rifle right there, up there, as you can see.
Now, is that just like they had then?
Yeah, that's how the parapet would have looked back then. Obviously without the scarring from the incoming, U.S. Navy rounds, but yeah, that's what it would have looked. And this one is what's on the existing one, so this is face shooting to the land side. And obviously a blank, but they don't want to hit cars for the parking lot.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, good idea, right? But they do that every year. They do in January. They do a recreation there, reenactment there. But you can see the swivel. You can see how it rotates 360 degrees for coverage and everything. Yeah, they're pretty neat. All right. Oh, one other thing that's kind of interesting. You want to look at it? I didn't touch on this, but at the end of the Fort Fisher, after it fell, one of the magazines blew up.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and someone was like, it was sabotage. There's Confederates on their way out. We're blowing up the remaining ammunition, and they wanted to kill Union all the way through. And then recent history actually says that some Union soldiers were celebrating and got drunk.
Yeah.
And they were smoking inside the magazine.
The 13th Indiana was involved in that.
Yeah.
Their commander was involved in
That
that.
boy went to the bar smoking in that magazine.
Yeah. Why would you smoke in the magazine? I mean, come on, man.
I'm just blaming.
They're from Indiana,
It's the
you
same
can't
reason
expect
some
much
people
more.
come up and smoke, and they'll smoke right up against a gasoline pump.
Yeah, that's
I love to- I love to say it's the U.S. Army showcasing its brilliance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I was wondering if he's gonna mention that. That's
Yeah.
what I